Placebo is a message to the non-conscious. A presentation by Professor Gershom Zajcek, Faculty of Medicine, Hebrew University of Jerusalem. A placebo is a substance or treatment with no active therapeutic effect. This is what you find in the Wikipedia. But it doesn't describe what a placebo is. Actually, placebo is a vital biological phenomenon, neglected and ignored by medicine. Placebo is a conscious message that triggers non-conscious processes. And here you see why. Every cell in the body is innervated, directly connected with an axon to the central nervous system. And this axon carries two kinds of information. Action potential on its membrane, which are electrical information, and axoplasmic transport in the axon itself. So axoplasmic transport is a cellular process responsible for movement of mitochondria, lipids, synaptic vesicles, proteins, and other cell parts to and from a neuron cell body through the cytoplasm of its axon, which is called axon plasm. Now, neuroscience is less interested in axoplasmic transport as the information carrier. They regard that the only information carrier are action potential, but in reality, axoplasmic transport, as we shall see also, carries information from the CNS to the cell and back. Now, all the cells are connected to the central CNS, and here you see one cell to show you that it represents any cell in the body. Myriad cells in our body are connected through axon to the CNS, and you have a network, a very complex network, which is known as embodiment, and I discussed it in other presentations. So let's look at one example. Here you have the GI tract. Again, many cells which are connected to the CNS, and we are looking on this cell which is responsible for converting pepsinogen to pepsin. Between meals, the pepsin, which is an enzyme for digesting proteins, between meals pepsin is inactive in form of pepsinogen, and once we eat, this pepsinogen is activated, is transformed into pepsin, and this pepsin then digests for us proteins. And now what is interesting is that we can activate this biochemical transition with our imagination. So here's our example. You sit in a room, comfortable, in a chair, and you think of a steak. And if you think intensively for a couple of minutes, you will feel that the tummy is rumbling and the water fills your mouth, and this is a sign that your imaged steak activated the GI tract, and the GI tract is preparing to get or to digest the steak which does not exist, because we are talking about imagination of a steak. So here's a concise representation what happened. I imagine a steak, and this image is transmitted from my mind, which is a site of the conscious, to the warp, which I'll explain later, which is a site of the non-conscious, And in this non-conscious realm, my imagining the steak caused pepsinogen to become pepsin, which means pepsinogen was there because my body did not expect to eat anything, and then with my imagination of the steak, I told you, look guys, we are going to have a meal, but there's no meal in sight. So what can we say? That imagination of this steak, or general imagination, activates pepsinogen. It is a cofactor of biochemical process because there are many processes like this in the GI tract when I imagine the steak, and therefore they are cofactors. And again, it is a cofactor of many other physico-chemical processes in the GI tract. And above all, it is a cofactor in a non-conscious process. So consciously I decide to activate this. I know now that I can activate pepsinogen to pepsin. I don't know how it is done, but it's enough if I think of it, imagine it. So this is what we are talking now, what happened when we imagine a steak. Now, this is not the whole story, because whatever my senses bring me about steak is here transformed into an image. So if I see a steak, the information is converted to an image in my mind. Or if I hear, for instance, last night we had a steak. So this steak which they were talking about is represented in my mind as an image. And even if I remember the good old times I had a steak, everything is represented by the same image. And what happens once you have this image, it is transmitted to the VOP, and you get transformation or activation of pepsinogen to pepsin. Obviously, it's not so intensive because it's fleeting, but there's always a response, even minor response to hearing a steak or to seeing a steak without intending to eat it. And this is a very important biological phenomenon. So let's continue our story, and suppose you go to a hypnotist, and for different reason he says you smell a steak. So once you under hypnosis you hear this, you smell a steak, it is represented by this steak image, and you get the same results. And again, you see, you smell a steak. It's not the smell. What's important is that you hear this steak, and this is represented. Now, if we continue the hypnotist example, next day you go to him and you are in a seance of hypnosis, and he says, you smell umtza. And what is umtza? Umtza is steak in Hebrew. We are talking about Israel. But you don't know what umtza is, and therefore nothing happens. You cannot, this umtza, the Hebrew steak, is not represented in your mind by a steak, and therefore nothing happens. So let's continue with this example. So you go to your doctor, you say to your doctor, look, doc, why can't I smell umtza? Because yesterday I visited the hypnotist and he says, smell umtza, and nothing happened. So the doc says, you got anosmia. Anosmia is a loss of the sense of smell, and therefore you don't smell the steak. But I have something for you. Take these pills, and these pills are steak pills which activate even the umza, and you will be cured of this anosmia. And indeed, I take these steak pills, and now umza has its proper representation, because I know that these steak pills work also for umza. Now, if we want to analyze it a little deeper, what happened? We go back and say, you go to your dog, hi dog, why can't I smell umza? So the dog says, you got this anosmia. Take one of these. These pills activate steak even when you hear umza. And this is very significant, because placebo pills here established an association between umza and steak, and now I know umza is already represented in two-dimensional representation. I know that umza is steak, and therefore whenever I hear umza, I will activate my pepsinogen. So this is how you cure anosmia. So what actually happened is, this was an example only. What happens in the GI tract when I imagine the steak, because the entire GI tract, myriad of processes, even the liver, bile, everything is preparing for a meal because I imagined the steak. And now if we want to analyze or to understand these such processes, which are extremely complex, we need a framework within which such phenomena may be studied, simplified. And I provide such a framework, and it is called Wisdom of the Body, a theory of the wisdom of the body, WOB, which I describe in other presentation. And here you get a summary. So what is the wisdom of the body? What is the theory? Wisdom of the body, or WOB, is a theory about the relationship between conscious and non-conscious. Two entities operate in our body: the conscious, which I call mind, and the non-conscious, called WOB. Mind is all that I am aware of in me, like my thoughts, feeling, and will. And wisdom of the body, WOB, is all in me which I am not conscious of. I am less concerned with their nature and mainly interested in their communication. It is striking that medicine is interested mainly in the conscious and less in the non-conscious. Yet the non-conscious keep us alive and heals our self-healing diseases. Medicine does not provide any explanation how non-conscious heals some diseases and keeps us alive, and I discuss it in other presentations. So I distinguish also between two kinds of explanation or narrative. First person explanation means how I understand my mind and WOB. For instance, how I feel when I imagine the steak. Third person explanation is what medicine has to say about my mind and WOB. So what is, I go to the doctor and said, look, I imagine a steak. So what could I do? So this is a third person explanation. WOB theory is also a way to simplify medical complexity. The statement, I am less concerned with the nature of the mind and WOB and mainly interested in their communication, is my way to simplify medical complexity. And let's now apply this to our previous example. So first, a short explanation. We have this mind and WOB. So mind has a short-term memory which integrates the now experience into an image, and a long-term memory which stores images of the past. Both are serial memories. Warp memory is parallel. I discussed it in other presentation. It is embedded in its processes. Mind and warp are separated by a one-way filter called verge. It lets mind images in, but there is no message going directly from warp to the mind. After all, warp is a non-conscious, and therefore if we feel what's happened here in this warp territory, it is conveyed to us with special sense organ in the warp, which make us feel what happened there, and I shall explain it immediately. So, two channels communicate sense information. Conscious senses are connected to short-term memory. They include also warp messages, like here, but non-conscious channel, these are senses which are directed directly to warp without us being aware of them. Here is a simple scheme illustrating the messages between mind and warp and the exterior. Sense organs collect information from the environment and transmit them into two channels, one to mind and one to warp. Mind converts sense information into image, and warp converts sense information into physical and chemical action. Sensation of a sense organ is converted into a distinct image. It is remembered in the mind as an image. Usually we take image to be a picture, but a melody is an image of the sound. A smell of a steak or a taste are two distinct images of a steak. So image is more than a picture. You might regard it as a representation of the senses, and if the image is dependent on all my senses, it is actually 5 to 6 dimensional. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about image. And there is a law. I think in images, not only when daydreaming, but always. Reality is represented in the mind as an image. Image is the only brain currency. Whatever is exchanged between mind and warp is an image. Mind continuously sends images to warp, which converts them into actions. So let's go back to our steak experiment. Here it is represented. I think of a steak, I imagine a steak. There is an image transmitted directly to the warp, and you get here pepsinogen is converted to pepsin. Verge prevents any transmission of images backward. So again, if we are talking about last night we had a steak, so the steak, this sentence is converted into a steak image. And here you have, again, if I see a steak, it's converted to a steak image. And here in the warp theory, all these senses are directly connected to the mind, and then they are represented by an image, or the 5-dimensional image of the steak. Now how, there's a question. How do I know that I activated pepsinogen? So I sit in this chair and I concentrate myself and think of a steak. And so how do I know that really this pepsinogen was converted to pepsin? So warp sends signal to the mind, and these signals here are tummy rumbling and mouth watering. So tummy rumbling is converted. There are sense organs in the warp which deliver the information that my tummy is rumbling and my mouth is watering. And so this is an indirect information on what's happening in warp, which is relevant to the mind. And so once I feel this tummy rumbling and mouth watering, I know that I succeeded activating the pepsinogen and myriad other enzymes and biochemical reaction in my body. Now, I wanted to convey to you how complex all these things are in reality. And we are now, I would like to show you the complexity of what we are talking about. So we start again, steak, imagination, and we are talking about a process. So this activation of pepsinogen to pepsin is a process in the non-conscious. But what we see already here, that this process is connected to other processes, and they are all part of, they participate in the response to my imagination of the steak. So I distinguish now between the process itself and the context of the process, which are all the other processes which participate in this transformation or transition of pepsinogen to pepsin. And even this is my arrow of my imagination is also the context of the process. Now, if we look what the context of this process is, we get the following picture. Before this, I would like to remind you, I shall show you the complex representation of the answer, how do I know that I activated the pepsinogen? So let's look at it. Here you have VOP, all the processes in VOP representation, and all the processes in mind. And there are even much more, but you see that I activated with my imagination this process, but it has a repercussion with other processes which I called context. And now, obviously, I don't get any information from here to here, and therefore there are several processes which are responsible for tummy rumbling, and these processes have also sense organs, and then I know that really I know that the tummy is rumbling. And you remember here you have the verge. So this picture all to show you how complex is the simple story. I imagine a steak, and this is a simplified in the theory of warp, because I said I am less concerned with their complexity and mainly interested in their communication. Once I know the channels of communication between warp and mind and warp, I can deduce many things which are medically very important. And this is what the warp theory is about. So let's conclude. Here's another example. As I just heard from somebody that there are placebo pills which are called stakies. And these placebo pills activate my GI tract. So I buy these stakies and get the same thing, because it's enough if I hear the word steak, it activates my imagination, and if I want to activate it 3 times a day, I take within the meal the steakies, and the steakies help me to digest or to convert pepsinogen to pepsin. And this is another dimension of what this placebo is doing to me, and this is what I mean. Placebo is a message to the non-conscious, and in other presentation I shall deal with it in depth as a message. Meanwhile, you are invited to listen to presentations like placebo activates biochemical processes, placebo effect, its biomedical function, chapter 1, chapter 2, and finally placebo effect, chapter 3. And if you like this idea, you are invited to listen to another presentation, conscious manipulation of the non-conscious. So this steak image was my conscious manipulation of the GI tract, but you can, this idea and the placebo idea, to apply to real medicine. Again, this is in other presentation, and I shall return to it in other presentation. Enjoy.